Issue. Tonight, the countdown to Election Day. With just 8 days left of this campaign, we're focused on 2 local races. First, Question 2, should the MCAS graduation requirement be repealed?
I know how much harm that has done.
I've never met a parent who came to me and said, "Can you do less for my daughter?"
And Senator Elizabeth Warren is here to talk about her fight for a 3rd term against Republican John Deaton. At Issue, Decision 2024 starts now.
Good Monday evening, and thanks for joining us. As a famous newsman once said, we'll do it live. Welcome into At Issue, everybody. Decision 2024. I'm Corey Smith.
And I'm Sue O'Connell. We're going live all of this week to get you ready for Election Day, of course. Many of you have already voted.
Yeah, in fact, Secretary of State Bill Galvin's office says nearly 20% of registered voters have cast their ballots already. That's nearly 1 million people. But it does mean millions more still have to make their decision and head to the polls.
So tonight, Senator Elizabeth Warren is in studio to talk about her re-election campaign, her challenger John Deaton, and about former President Trump's rally yesterday in New York City that was overshadowed by racist and crude remarks by some of his supporters.
We'll start tonight with question 2 on the Massachusetts ballot. It's one all parents, students, and teachers have a stake in and an opinion on.
A yes vote would eliminate the MCAS standardized test as a graduation requirement. NBC 10's Jeff Saperstone talked to both sides.
Well, this is one of the most talked about ballot questions that would impact thousands of students across the Commonwealth. It's question 2. A yes vote would end the MCAS as a graduation requirement. A no vote, it would keep it as is. And as you can imagine, there are passionate arguments on both sides. When it comes to the MCAS as a requirement for graduating high school, there are a range of opinions.
I know how much harm that has done.
This graduation requirement has helped all students in Massachusetts.
Both sides have been making the case on TV and through outreach. The Yes on 2 campaign is backed by the Massachusetts Teachers Association, which represents 117,000 educators.
I mean, you've heard the argument that, okay, we do away with that requirement, and then there's no standard across the board for different schools. And what do you say to that?
I say that that's a misnomer because the MCAS is not a standard.
MTA Vice President Deb McCarthy, a former 5th grade teacher, says the test is more of a snapshot in time. And in place of it, she says, students would be evaluated on other metrics like grades and class credits.
And we have learners who are meeting those metrics as freshmen, sophomore, juniors, and seniors, and then they're denied the diploma.
On the flip side, opponents of question 2 say getting rid of the MCAS as a graduation requirement will put students at a competitive disadvantage.
Do you think it would set Massachusetts back?
There's no doubt about it.
Ed Lambert is the executive director of the Business Alliance for Education. He says getting rid of the requirement will create real inequities.
Importantly, we don't want to go back to the days when we had a different set of expectations for students depending on their zip code, where they lived.
Both sides have received big-name backing. Senator Elizabeth Warren and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley are siding with the yes vote. No backers include Governor Maura Healey and her Education Secretary, Patrick Tutwiler. Currently, Massachusetts is one of 9 states that requires a test to graduate.
By maintaining this standard, we won't go back to the time where we've got over 300 different standards set by each community.
The data shows that these scores are not the measures of the skill set necessary for the 21st century workforce.
A debate that will continue until voters have their say on November 5th. Jeff Saperstone, NBC 10 Boston.
All right, we want to talk to 2 folks who have a great deal of experience dealing with the MCAS test. They are both public school teachers who are coming at this issue from 2 different perspectives. James Conway is a member of the Massachusetts Teachers Association and a high school teacher from the North Shore who opposes question 2. And Deb McCarthy, who you just saw there in Jeff's report, has been an elementary school teacher in Hull for 25 years. She's the vice president of the MTA, and she supports a yes vote on question 2. Thank you both for coming in here and agreeing to speak with us. This is definitely an important issue, so we appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks for having me.
All right, James, let's start with you. The no side worries about the different standards in different communities, but is local control not as good as state control of educational standards?
Well, we've adopted statewide standards, and the MCAS system actually is a way to assess those standards. So it ensures that regardless of what zip code a student comes from, that they're being assessed on the same things, that they're being taught the same things, and there's a level of quality control and accountability behind that. Obviously, how local districts want to resource and staff and fund their schools is up to them. But I think it's important to have a statewide standard so we make sure that everyone who has a Massachusetts diploma has the skills they need to compete for jobs in colleges in the 21st century.
Deb, would this give us 300 different standards to graduate?
Absolutely not. And just so, and I brought this for showing, over 50 pages of the standards as a fifth grade educator that I was mandated to teach to. But I think what's really important about this question is I'm from Hull. Students from Hull get accepted into Harvard. Students from Weymouth get accepted into Harvard. And students from Wellesley. Not based on the MCAS scores, because colleges don't ask for them. Based upon our rigorous coursework, the GPA, and the course transcripts.
So, Deb, Governor Healy says if you eliminate the MCAS graduation requirement, don't replace it with a statewide standard, we'll be holding our schools to lower standards than states like Mississippi. You're shaking your head. You don't agree?
I absolutely do not agree. We are number one because we have a highly educated workforce. Educators in Massachusetts have to get their master's within 5 years. We have to get recertified every 5 years. We get evaluated every year. We have to teach to the objectives, unannounced walkthroughs with the objective aligned with the standard. We have standard-based report cards. That's why we're number one, not a one-time metric.
James, your thoughts on the same question. Is Governor Healy right?
I think the governor is right, especially because she, Vice President Harris, Governor Shapiro, and others are talking about not just college readiness, but career readiness as well. So for some students, the high school diploma might be the highest level of education they achieve. So I think it's important for that group of students to have some kind of metric of knowing whether they can write a 5-paragraph essay or if they can do sort of basic high school level math. And it's a very easy test for employers to see, oh, this person, by having a Massachusetts diploma, has the skills that they need to work for me.
May I just quickly get that? Because the MCAS only measures 43% of the standards. And that's the whole point, that there is a whole bunch of standards that we are not educating to. Research papers, the ability to debate respectfully, to be a good public speaker. And so the MCAS is just a snapshot in time of really 43% of the standards.
Deb, one of the concerns that we hear from education advocates, the existing law is that students with disabilities must meet the state standards. If the MCAS graduation requirement goes away, some parents have expressed to me that children who are on the IEPs, the individual education plans, which parents have to fight to get implemented sometimes, they're concerned that their children might get less attention if they don't have to be paid attention to pass the MCAS. What's your thoughts on that?
So the IEP is federal law, right? And that it's mandated. You have to do what's on the IEP. What will happen is the students on an IEP will become more than just a test score. And their high school career won't be about passing that metric. They'll have the opportunity to be educated to all of the standards, and their education will be more prepared for the 21st century workforce.
John, James, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, I share those concerns that the parent brought up, because I'm worried if we get rid of this graduation requirement, a lot more students will fall through the cracks. So I know the S side has talked a lot about English language learners and students on IEPs. I actually think the test benefits them because it's holding them to the same high standards as everybody else. It's forcing educators to actually, districts and administrators and educators are going to be evaluated whether they can teach to those kids as well. So they have to teach them to the same high standard as everybody.
Yeah, and I just want to be really clear. The MCAS isn't a standard. And let's talk about what happened last year. We had 63% of EL learners not pass. 31% were students with a disability, and 21% were students who are low income. And what happens when you don't pass it, you are unable to select that course that you would like to take, and you have to take a remediation course. We have students who miss it by one question. And for 2 years, they are taking this remediation course by one question.
Rightly so, we are centering students in this conversation.
Thank you.
I want to ask teachers, and a question that the MCAS or the STAR test down in Texas always elicits is, are you all having to teach to the test rather than, as Deb mentioned, teaching these skills like speaking skills, debating, writing a 5-point essay? What are you seeing on the ground right now in the classroom? Are you having to teach to this test to make sure kids pass?
I would argue, in my case, I'm not teaching to this test. And also, all teachers teach to tests, right? We assess our own students based on statewide standards based on what we're teaching in the classroom. there are no classrooms that I can think of that don't have tests, right? So all teachers are teaching, it's called backwards design. We're teaching to the subjects that, and the standards that we're supposed to be. So I think the MCAS is a way of ensuring quality control for that.
This is where there's a big difference because James doesn't have an MCAS test. 5th grade, we have 3 for 25 years. I was around when it first came in, and I actually believed in it. Unfortunately, over time, the intent didn't match the impact, and so I know that we are teaching to a test. I know the harm if students do not pass that test, and their trajectory in life when they're denied a diploma. We were out canvassing yesterday, and we ran into somebody and came up, and he said he dropped out of school because of the MCAS.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. James and Deb, thank you so much for being here. More importantly, thank you for what you do every single day.
Thank you.
We really do appreciate it.
An honor.
And your advocacy. Thank you.
And for more on the ballot questions, just scan the QR code you see there on your screen. That's going to take you to our website, NBC10Boston.com. We have a comprehensive guide on all 5 questions.
And tomorrow night, a closer look at question 3. If approved, it would allow Uber and Lyft drivers in Massachusetts to form unions. We're going to look at why some major organized labor groups are not on board with this.
All right, still to come, Democrats in Washington face a tough battle to hold on to their Senate majority. And one race they need to win is right here in Massachusetts.
We're going to hear from both Senator Elizabeth Warren and John Deaton on the key issues affecting the state. The senator joins us in studio next.
We are all in this together, people from every walk of life, understanding that the vast majority of us have so much more in common than what separates us. And we here are fighting for the future.
You are looking live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where Vice President Kamala Harris is addressing a very large crowd in Ann Arbor. You see all the faces behind her. Look how young they are, Sue, and there's a reason for that. We know the Harris-Walz campaign certainly trying to bring out those Generation Z voters, the millennials, especially in a swing state like Michigan. But let's bring things home to Massachusetts and talk about Senator Elizabeth Warren. You know, when she won her Massachusetts Senate seat back in 2012, she ran with a very popular incumbent, some guy named Barack Obama, at the top of the ticket.
And at the time, Warren defeated Scott Brown, a Republican who was more in the mold of Charlie Baker rather than Donald Trump. And now she's seeking a 3rd term. Warren is facing a Republican who says that he, too, is in that moderate lane, John Deaton.
NBC 10 Boston political reporter Matt Pritchard sat down with both Senator Warren and John Deaton.
Projecting confidence in the election's final days.
Give me 6 more years in this fight.
I still think I have a shot, even though it's a long one.
Incumbent Senator Elizabeth Warren and Republican newcomer John Deaton vying for Bay State votes, talking through some of the biggest issues facing the Commonwealth.
Starting with Stewart Health Care and the hospitals that we've seen close, whether it's the Kearney or out at Neshoba Valley. Where do you feel like you differ in terms of approach to this?
When United Healthcare was going to buy Stewart, Senator Warren rushed and said she objected to it because it's a big, bad corporation, right? Her anti-business stance is so extreme. She didn't sit back and say, well, who's the other buyers, what might happen? And that deal fell through.
There was never an offer to buy the hospitals. What United wanted to buy were the doctors' practices, the last bit of value left in the entire system. But particularly on health care, I think we need to beat these for-profit outfits out of our healthcare system.
Turning to immigration and addressing migrant shelter concerns in Massachusetts.
It's bankrupting the state. We've spent over $1 billion, we know. We're projected to spend over another $1 billion going forward. We're still operating in emergency status, and we desperately need that reform bill that Senator Warren said no to.
What, in your mind, are the next steps here to really help Massachusetts in particular?
The federal government ought to fully reimburse the states for whatever expenses the states incur in health care, in education, in housing for the migrants in the state. And I think that ought to be our key principle. We also, obviously, we need border security.
On the housing crisis and taxing the estates of billionaires to spur development.
You lower what it costs to build housing in Massachusetts, And the federal government will partner up with you in building a stronger, more vital community.
It's not a solution. It's not. It's a slogan. We want builders to build. So you have to give them the reason to build it. So here's some tax credits for you to build low-income housing.
And while voters weigh those varying visions, both candidates have labeled the other as too extreme, hoping to lock down a critical seat in the Senate.
It's about Senate control.
I think people are dying for an alternative.
Matt Pritchard, NBC 10 Boston.
All right, we've had both John Deaton and Senator Warren on at issue. We had John Deaton 8 days ago. You can watch that interview on our website, NBCBoston.com/politics.
Senator Warren joined us in studio this afternoon, and we started our conversation with a question about her opponent.
Since you were last here in September, you've debated John Deaton multiple times now. What have you learned about him from those contests, and how do you see where this race is right now?
You know, I think of this race as ultimately, this is about control of the Senate. We're basically going to be at 50-50. If the Republicans can get this seat in Massachusetts, then it's Republican control of the Senate. And what that will mean, for example, is that we will not be in a position to make Roe versus Wade law of the land everywhere. It also has ramifications everywhere else. It means that the people in charge of our education policy are people who literally don't believe in public education. People in charge of our climate policy literally will be people who are climate deniers. People who will be in charge of picking our judges will be people who will make sure they are carefully screened to be totally anti-abortion. People who will be in charge of our health care policy will be the people who are trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act. People who will be in charge of our gun policy will be people who believe that thoughts and prayers are all that we need. So there's a lot on the line in specific issues like abortion, but all the way across the board on kind of how every issue shapes up that touches people here in Massachusetts.
John Deaton says that he wouldn't be a reliable Republican vote if he becomes senator, that might make him more valuable. Do you believe him?
You know, let me just start out by saying everything I just described happens simply by starting out with the Republicans. In other words, it is the Republican majority that will determine who it is that runs education policy, Department of Education, who becomes the Attorney General, and so on. It's not just a question of, well, once in a while I might cross the aisle to vote. It's, are the Republicans in charge of the Senate and decide what gets voted on, or are the Democrats? And he can't back away from that. He also can't back away from the fact that as much as he wants to say, oh, I'm very moderate here, back when he was in the primary, he went on the stage at the Republican debate and bragged that he was the only Republican on that stage who was actively raising money for Republicans to take control of the United States Senate. And understand this, if Republicans have control, it won't be the most moderates that have control. We've already seen that. It's the extremist wing that dictates policy. And the Republicans in a 50-50 Senate do not go forward unless they've got that wing to move with them. In other words, they're going to be steering the boat.
So you've been out campaigning for yourself. You've been out campaigning for Harris Walz. I'm hearing from some of my friends and colleagues and folks I know from Massachusetts who have been out deployed, out knocking doors, and they keep reporting to me some very interesting conversations that they're hearing from voters. What are voters telling you, both here in Massachusetts and anywhere that you've been? What are the issues? We keep saying it's immigration, it's inflation, but what are they saying to you?
So what I hear is much more about the stakes of this election. And I was just talking about the stakes of Senate control. Stakes at the presidential level just literally could not be higher. We just saw last night this rally in New York that has all the trappings of the Nazi fascist rally from back in the 1930s. And the whole idea that Trump in the closing days, if it hadn't been clear before, has made it even clearer. You know, his own chief of staff comes out and says he's Nazi to the core, but he does that central move that says we're going to pick the most vulnerable groups, and we're going to say them. They're bad, they're subhuman, they're garbage. And that's a way not to have to talk about any other issues, not to have to talk about the fact that Trump is responsible for getting rid of protection for abortion, so that now 30% of all women live in states that effectively ban access to abortion. So this is like one of these moments where the difference between the two candidates, this Donald Trump, we're going to hate on other people, that's how we get power, versus Kamala Harris, who says she's trying to build a country that works not just for a handful at the top, but that works for everyone. That's really on the ballot here in Massachusetts, but all across this country.
I think before Sunday's rally, you heard a lot of pundits talking about maybe the Democrats are sort of overblowing this democracy is on the ballot thing. After Sunday's rally, where you hear things like Puerto Rico is a floating island of garbage, America is for Americans and Americans only, Kamala Harris is the Antichrist. Does that put some wind at the sails of the democracy argument for you?
The particular line you cited about America's for Americans only, you know what that's a reference to. That is the line that the Germans used, that the Nazis used, that the American Nazis used, that Germany is for Germans only. And the echoes of what Trump himself is telling us is deeply alarming.
That campaign has smart people working for it. Do you think they know that what he said is?
Of course they know that. There's no mistake here. Someone doesn't stumble into echoing Nazi language, into picking a place and a time for a rally that echoes the Nazi roots of it. I think that Trump knows exactly what he's doing, and he's placing his bet. And his bet is that he can stir up enough hate, enough fear, enough them versus us, that it will make him close to win, and then maybe he can stir up enough hate and division that he can seize power.
So let's talk back a little bit about Harris and Walz. The blue wall states we talk about, of course, the swing states that decide the election. We got Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan in particular. Which state are you most concerned about for a Walz-Harris win there?
Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. I've been to all of them more than once, back and forth. And look, I got to say, there is great energy on the ground. I go, I have big crowds, they're excited, but of course, I don't see a random sample. People are giving it everything they've got in this election. And this is a moment when we try to help out from Massachusetts. I say, when people say, why are you here? You're running for re-election in Massachusetts. And my answer is, the best thing I can do for the people of Massachusetts is make sure that Kamala Harris wins the White House and Democrats stay in charge in the House and in the Senate. But this is one of those moments when people get it, and people are doing everything they can. Right here in Massachusetts, I talk to people who are on the phone making calls into Pennsylvania, making calls into Wisconsin, into Michigan, even into North Carolina and Arizona and Nevada and Georgia, right? All 7 of the states that are in play. People who are reaching down and sending another $10 to Bob Casey, or another $10 to in Pennsylvania, of course, or another $10 to Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin. You know, $10 gets you halfway toward a pizza on the ground for the volunteers who are coming into the offices and doing the door knocking, helping organize drives so that people will be able to get to the polls, people can vote early, trying to help out in that. All of that is by way of saying it's a time when you feel a real kinship with voters all around the country. We're on the front lines of a powerful battle that will be resolved in just 8 days.
We want to thank Senator Elizabeth Warren for speaking with us. Again, we interviewed John Deaton just a week ago. You can see that full interview at NBCBoston.com. politics. That is going to do it for this first night of At Issue Decision 2024. Tomorrow, we're joined by advocates for ballot question 3, which would allow rideshare drivers to unionize here if approved.
And Massachusetts Democratic Party Chair Steve Kerrigan and Republican Party Chair Amy Carnevale will join us. Stay tuned to it.